In this presentation, we're going to do a quick review of photosynthesis and respiration. So remember that in photosynthesis, the light energy or the radiation goes into the leaf through the stoma into the chloroplast, and so does the carbon dioxide. The water comes up through the roots into the leaf, into the chloroplast, and that light energy gets that reaction going, and it creates glucose and it releases that oxygen. So the whole reason for photosynthesis is to make energy. So we're converting that light or radiant energy into glucose or food for the plant. Here's the chemical equation for photosynthesis. So every life process of every organism starts with plants. So photosynthesis is a necessary life process, and it takes that light energy and it turns it into chemical energy. Glucose is the chemical energy. So it takes the raw materials, everything to the left of the arrow are raw materials. That's the carbon dioxide and water, and stores it in what it makes, the product. These are the products, glucose and oxygen. Glucose is the sugar or the food that it makes, and oxygen is the byproduct or the waste that humans or other organisms take in. Here's the chemical equation that we used in class and that you completed in formative. So here are the raw materials, everything to the left of the arrow. Here are our reactants, carbon dioxide and water. The sun's energy comes in and it is absorbed by the chlorophyll, which is in that chloroplast, and it gets the sun's energy, gets that whole reaction going. Since it's in the raw materials or the reactants, we call it an endothermic reaction. And it produces the product, which is sugar and oxygen. Sugar is the food or the glucose that it makes, so the plant can then break that down and get energy to help it grow and all of the other functions it needs to be healthy. All plant cells have chloroplasts. This is a chloroplast right here. This is where photosynthesis takes place. And inside it is the chlorophyll. The chlorophyll is what traps that energy in the sunlight to get that reaction going so it can create that glucose and oxygen. Then it can break it down for energy for that plant. Then when other organisms eat that plant, that energy is transferred to them. Plants are called producers because they make or produce their own food. So for example, when you go to the supermarket, this right here shows the produce section because all of these are plants, the fruits and vegetables. Another word for plants other than producer are autotrophs because they automatically make or produce their own food. So all energy for living things come from the sun first, and then that sun helps all the plants create their own food. For example, plants, some bacteria, some algae, and some protists. Remember we saw those protists under the microscope. Here's a picture of one of the protists that we saw under the microscope, and that was the euglena. And euglenas are really cool because they not only are one-celled, but they have a nucleus and a chloroplast, where we usually think of only plants having chloroplasts. There are very few animals that also have chloroplasts, and the euglena is one of them. So a euglena can consume food or it can create its own food. Plus it has a nucleus but it's still a prokaryote because it's only a one-celled organism. When plants create that food or glucose or sugar, it contains all that chemical energy that all of its cells need to carry out its life processes. So remember how we talked about all organisms have life processes, things that make them alive. So without energy, all those living things can't replace cells or build body parts or reproduce. So here's a list of all of the life processes you've been learning about since the first quarter. All living things can move. They breathe or respire. Sense means that they have different senses that they can react to their environment. So there's a stimulus and that organism is going to respond to it. They grow, they can reproduce, they get rid of waste, which is called excretion, and they have to eat, or which is nutrition, or make their own food like a plant and break that down for the energy so that it can carry out all of these life processes. So after photosynthesis, the plant takes that glucose or food and it's going to break it down through a process called respiration. Now you also respire. You use your lungs for respiration to breathe in the oxygen that plants give off and give off the carbon dioxide that plants need. So through cellular respiration in a plant, we've now taken that photosynthesis chemical reaction and we flipped it, because now our raw materials or our reactants are what used to be the product, glucose and oxygen. They're now our raw materials or our reactants, and it's going to break that down into carbon dioxide, water, and energy. That energy is called ATP, and it uses that energy for all of its growth and life processes. Then when another organism eats that plant, they get that energy as well. Sometimes the plant has excess water, especially in that last slide you saw where respiration created that water. So water comes up through the roots, up the stem, and up to the leaf. And if there's too much of it, it can evaporate out of the stomata. When it evaporates, that's called transpiration. As the water leaves the leaf, it acts kind of like a straw or a capillary and pulls that water up from the roots into the leaf, and it can use it for photosynthesis, or if it's too much, it can leave the plant and go into the water cycle as transpiration. So in a nutshell, photosynthesis traps that sun's energy through the process of photosynthesis, turns it into chemical energy, and that chemical energy is then broken down to help that plant grow and carry out its life processes. And then when other organisms eat those plants, the energy is transferred to them. The plants are the basis of any food chain or food web. So without photosynthesis, there would be no life on Earth. So if we look at this food chain, the sun's energy is captured by these plants with its chlorophyll in the chloroplast to create that glucose and oxygen. So if we look at a food chain, the plants always start the food chain. And when a herbivore eats that plant, it gets the energy out of the plant. And then when the bird or the carnivore eats the little mouse or the herbivore, it gets that energy. So if you look at the arrow, it's pointing towards the one that receives the energy. The one that's doing the eating is backwards, okay? So it's pointing where the energy flow. So the energy came from the sun into the plant. It photosynthesized, made food. the herbivore ate it and the energy went into its body, and then when the bird ate the mouse, the energy went into the bird or the carnivore. So all food chains or food webs start with a producer or an autotroph.